terms of aerial combat, dogfighting is probably one of the most well-known terms. And it's one of the most well-known methods of combat as a result, when at least two planes go toe-to-toe at close range. It's happened quite frequently in the history of warfare, but at least one dogfight was a lot weirder than, well, you'd expect. Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse, and before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains. What? And today, we're going to talk about a particular aerial engagement that occurred during World War II that was just really strange. It just did not occur, or involve the type of aircraft that you would really expect to be fighting in the manner that they were. And yet, they were. The term dogfight is often thrown around quite often, and it refers directly to an aerial battle between fighter aircraft conducted at close range. The term is not technically used anymore in the military, as modern terminology for air-to-air combat is air combat maneuvering, or ACM, which refers to tactical situations that require the use of individual basic fighter maneuvers, or BFM, to attack or evade one or more opponents, but the term dogfight still hangs around, although in the modern day these sorts of engagements do not happen very often, if hardly at all. The reason for this is mostly involving modern missile systems. Guidance systems can track targets way beyond the range that pilots can actually, well, see. A dogfight is close range by nature, and most modern aircraft are designed specifically to avoid getting into close range. The F-22 Raptor, for example, was designed specifically to not only be stealthy and undetectable, but also be able to shoot down enemies from miles out, scoring kills without the enemy even knowing that they're there. But especially towards the middle of the 20th century, and during World War II, dogfighting was still a pretty common practice. It actually first occurred during the Mexican Revolution, on November 30th, 1913, between two American mercenaries who were fighting for opposing sides. World War I saw the practice evolve quite a bit, and by World War II, all the major air forces did have sometimes multiple planes capable of carrying out dogfighting, as that was the principal method for dealing with air-to-air combat. They didn't have access to guidance systems, or missiles for that matter. They only had guns, and to use them, you had to see the opponent. So dogfighting was the go-to tactic, and it happened frequently during the course of the war. But at least one of these dogfights was just so weird, and that was mostly down to the planes that it involved. This particular dogfight took place between a single B-24 Liberator, as well as two focke-wulf FW-200 Condors. Now, those in the know might recognize this as already being incredibly bizarre, because neither of these types of aircraft was at all designed for dogfighting. At all. The B-24 was a heavy bomber designed by Consolidated Aircraft of San Diego, California. It was meant for high cruise speed, long range, as well as the ability to carry a heavy bomb load, because as a B-24, it is a bomber. And even as a bomber, it was actually known as being a bit more difficult to fly than some of the other bombers in the American forces. It had a lower ceiling and was way less robust than the B-17 Flying Fortresses. Aircrews actually preferred the 17, but the general staff offices liked the B-24 for whatever reason, so they were also procured in very high numbers, and still saw extensive use. It's important to stress at this point that yes, it was not at all meant to be in a dogfight, and neither was the FW-200 Condor. The Condor was also known as the courier to the Allied forces, and it's a German, all-metal, four-engine monoplane, and it was actually not developed for military use at all. Focke-Wulf built it as a long-range airliner for civilian transport, but the Japanese requested a long-range maritime patrol aircraft, and that led Focke-Wulf to develop it into a military version that did see service with the Luftwaffe as well. They used it for long-range reconnaissance as well as an anti-shipping patrol bomber aircraft. They never built that many of them, but they did see extensive use. Dogfights by their nature require very agile aircraft generally, capable of making pretty sharp turns. Bombers are big, lumbering, clunky. They don't generally do the intense maneuvers that fighter aircraft do. So how did these two wind up in a fight? Well, it happened over the Atlantic Ocean in 1943, August 17th to be precise. And our story starts with a B-24D, which was flying about 300 miles west of Lisbon, Portugal. It was attached to the U.S. Army Air Force's 480th Anti-Submarine Group, and was heading from its base in French Morocco to give some air cover to a group of British ships. The Condors, by extension, were also flying in that area, also because of the British ships, but they were there to attack them. Now, the 480th had been flying out there on patrol against German U-boats pretty frequently, along with the Royal Air Force's Coastal Command. And because of how frequent the anti-submarine patrols were getting, the German forces actually transferred some of the anti-convoy work from U-boats to the Luftwaffe, who they figured could handle the situation better. In fact, the Liberators and the Condors had tangled in the past. This particular day and fight was not the first time they'd shot at each other, or even shot each other down. But at least in those situations, the Condors had been flying with fighter aircraft, so it wasn't like they were alone. This time, however, the pilot of the Liberator, Hugh Maxwell Jr., was informed due to broken radio silence that a group of Condors had been spotted. The radar operator on board the plane reported a pair of contacts 15 miles away, and his navigator then calculated that they would arrive over the convoy that they were supposed to be protecting at about the same time as the Liberator. This situation meant that Maxwell did not have any other option but to engage these planes. Mind you, Maxwell had never even flown a fighter at all. He'd only ever flown bombers, particularly the B-18 and the B-25. So he was just kind of winging it when it came to how to dogfight. He initiated it by diving out of the clouds at 1,000 feet, onto the tail of the leading Condor. He actually told his gunners to hold fire until they were within range, but the Condor fired immediately. Maxwell closed the gap as quickly as he could, and then opened fire. According to Maxwell himself, the Germans never came out of a diving turn after that. They had taken too much damage and would wind up crashing. But there was a second Condor, and that plane had been firing at Maxwell pretty much the whole time. The gunners on board the B-24, which was named Ark, by the way, were shooting back the whole time, but this wasn't enough to dissuade the Germans, and Ark wound up losing her number 3 and number 4 engines. Also, the right wing had been turned into Swiss cheese, and on fire. The situation probably would have been averted had he been flying a different model of B-24. See, this particular B-24 had been specially modified for anti-submarine work, and in order to increase range, as well as how many depth charges they could hold, they basically stripped off all the armor. So, yeah. When the Condor's bullets struck the aircraft, everyone on board got hit by shrapnel, and their hydraulic system was completely shot. Maxwell actually freaked out at first, because he thought his whole left leg was covered in blood, but then he realized it wasn't blood, it was hydraulic fluid. The right wing was so badly damaged that it could no longer supply the plane lift, and the B-24 began to go down. Maxwell fought with the controls to try to make the landing as soft as reasonably possible, and at the last second, he kicked in full right rudder, and that wound up throwing the plane into a skid along the surface of the water. This act actually prevented the aircraft from cartwheeling and breaking up completely. The plane wound up breaking into only 3 pieces, and the water had actually put the fire out, so it didn't explode. 7 of the 10 crew members wound up surviving. The second Condor that had shot them down had actually taken damage in the exchange. It was seen traveling over the waves at rather low altitude with its number 3 engine gone. The pilot was able to keep that plane in the air, however, and he made it back to Bordeaux. but according to at least one source, the plane did crash on landing, though all crew members survived. The crash of the Ark did not go unnoticed by the British. One of the convoy's escorts, the destroyer Highlander, wound up picking up Maxwell's crew, and it also picked up 4 survivors from the Condor that they had shot down, 2 of whom wound up dying that night because they were badly burned. Despite being shot down, Maxwell and his crew had accomplished their goal. They'd managed to protect the convoy from a bombing run by German forces. For his efforts of engaging in a dogfight in a bomber against other bombers, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the 480th would wind up getting a Presidential Unit Citation. Maxwell would go on to become a B-29 instructor pilot, and he remained with the military even after the war, finishing his career in Air Force intelligence, finally retiring in 1969. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Pinter Kitson 131-232, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Enzek A1, Arthur Roy, Tommy Rossini, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Brian, Jack Carson's Rural Videos, Hayden DeGrow, Master of None, Lord Hoff 444, That Guy with the Beard, Mark Holding, Murder Drone Stall, A-Person 723, DN Trouble Typhoon, Alfonso Lapuche, Royal Hudson 2860, Isurfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matthew Wolf, Ohio Trucker 1, Mr. Sleepy, Matt Weaver, Alaric Jaspers, Tom Red Lion, NS Productions 8104, Hannah Bird, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, and Dr. Razor 78. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.